All right, y'all. This is 17A, so the first 2/3 of Chapter 17. I'm going to try to go through it quickly because it's quite a bit of material. It doesn't mean that you should go through it quickly. It means you should take your time on it because it is 2/3 of the chapter. This talks about the different types of risks and environmental hazards, biological hazards, chemical hazards that people have in their everyday lives, and you're going to differentiate them between, I want you to kind of have this dichotomy in your head, developing versus developed. Okay, so make sure you're able to differentiate those. There are a couple of other dichotomies you need to know. You need to know the difference between the words acute and chronic. Okay, and we're talking about different types of diseases that affect you quickly and different types of diseases that are ongoing. So you need to be able to link these different chronic diseases to developing versus developed, acute, developing to developed. You need to make sure you're able to do that. Okay, chemical, biological, physical factors that affect you. So all those things are going to be very important. Just keep track of those in your mind. Make a note card over these. All right. So human disease, you're going to identify the different types of human diseases and which ones are specific to places like America, which places are specific to countries in Central Africa, right? Places like that. Those are really good examples of ways to look at diseases. Understand risk factors for chronic diseases, historically important diseases such as the plague. Identify major emergent infectious diseases such as mad cow disease, Ebola, different types of flus, and discuss the future challenges for improving public health. A disease is any impaired function of the body with a characteristic set of symptoms. Infectious disease is a disease caused by a pathogen, and in your book there's some good examples of different pathogens. I believe there'll be a picture of it pretty soon. Acute disease rapidly impairs the functioning of an organism, and chronic disease slowly impairs the functioning of an organism. So think like heart disease, different types of cardiovascular diseases that happen over time, diabetes, things like that. Acute diseases are things that make you crack and bleed out right away. Okay, so here you go. We need to make sure you know generally how this graph looks, right? So A, this is global. And more than 3/4 of all the deaths in the world are caused by diseases, including respiratory, digestive. Digestive, we're talking about diarrheal. So just keep that in mind. Back in the day, you got diarrhea, that was it. You better write out a will because you're not going to make it back from it, right? Whatever the disease that was causing you to have that issue with your digestive system would take away your nutrients, things like that, and you wouldn't survive, right? Even if your body could eventually develop some sort of working understanding with the virus, if you didn't have the nutrients available to carry out other life functions, you would die, which brings us to like hunger, right? So a lot of people in third world countries will die of hunger, and those go hand in hand with these different types of digestive diseases. Let's see, cardiovascular diseases. So make sure you know right here globally, we get a lot of cardiovascular diseases. That could be heart, be things like stroke, right? Cancers. Look here of the infectious diseases. So 1/4 right here are infectious diseases. In part B, this right here is pulling out these infectious diseases and breaking it down. So respiratory infections like pneumonia, right? These can come from when you have impaired immune systems as well. You check this out right here. Having poor water and food quality, you can get this. Tuberculosis, TB. What's really interesting about tuberculosis is that there are working cures for them and treatments, but if you don't take all your antibiotics over a period of time, it'll come back, right? And you end up with the antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis. And malaria, places like Central Africa and Uganda, for mosquitoes will lose 1% of their GDP, up to about 1% of their GDP, gross domestic product, per year because of people not able to work because they're taking care of kids in the hospital. And children are more affected by malaria than adults because they don't have as good of an immune system, as robust of an immune system. Okay, so places like in the U.S., we die a lot more from things like injury, alcohol abuse, cancer, smoking. So just keep that in mind, like first world problems versus third world problems. Okay, so let's look at the risk factors in humans. So if you're in a low-income country, developing nation, the top risk factors leading to chronic disease are associated with poverty. And so if you don't have money, you're not going to have money to put into taxes towards public infrastructure for dealing with water management. So you're going to have untreated water. You're going to have unsafe drinking water. You might not even have a faucet. You might just go get it out of like a stream or a creek or even a puddle sometimes. You've seen those pictures of small children drinking water out of a puddle, out of a dirty, discarded plastic bottle, and that's what they got. Okay, that's what they have, so that's what they're going to use. Not having good sanitation is going to leave you open to different types of diseases, like the coliform bacteria that we were learning about earlier, and malnutrition, so don't have access to good food and nutrients. Risk factors for chronic diseases in high-income countries are from tobacco, right? So a really good way to increase public health in places like America is to reduce smoking, to add incentives to stop smoking. Education is really, really big on that, right? So when in doubt, remember, a good way to fix anything or to move towards fixing things is to educate. Things like PSAs, things like that, right? That's what the Surgeon General's warning is on the tobacco labels, right? Yeah. Combination of less active lifestyle, so sedentary. So if you're sitting around a lot, you're doing a number on your cardiovascular system, and that'll eventually lead to different health problems, right? These are problems that places that are developing don't have, right? Because they have to move around a lot to get their work done. A lot more manual physical labor. Okay, poor nutrition. So that's kind of weird, right? So in places like third world countries or developing countries, they got malnutrition, okay, where they don't even have access to the proper nutrients. Here we have poor nutrition, where we make poor eating decisions. So that will lead to health problems, right? So we're choosing through our own lifestyle to do that. And a lot of this could just be education, but a lot of it is just choice. You know, like we have the good life and we're able to eat whatever we want when we want. Okay, overeating leads to high blood pressure and obesity. Okay, so these are some of the leading factors here. Kind of makes you feel a little silly, right? Okay, so look here. Here's the difference between low-income and high-income nations. So you want to pause the screen and kind of look at it and just kind of look at the shift here. And you're going to see as time goes on for a developing country that these blue bars are going to decrease and the magenta bars are going to increase. So there's a graph you're going to see in a minute. But go ahead and just take a look. You want to kind of split this up into where the magenta is high and where the blue bars are high. And just kind of look at what the differences are between a country like the United States and a country like maybe like Sierra Leone or something like that, right? So go ahead and take a look at that. When you all did your population pyramids, I want you to relate this back to your population pyramids that you did, that population pyramid lab. So think about that. Think about the country that you studied earlier this year. And kind of think, what would be the risk factors, public health risk factors for your country? All right, so here are the pathways to transmitting pathogens. So poor countries again, water, air, you don't have good food, you have exposure to disease vectors such as rats, livestock animals, we're going to talk about that in a minute, and other humans, of course. And just keep in mind that these are all enhanced by modern travel. So our ability to get on airplanes means that any disease can get pretty much anywhere in the world within 24 hours. That's crazy, right? So think zombie apocalypse, all happens in 24 hours. Coral, right? You save Coral. Okay, and also, of course, these are exacerbated by the inconvenient truth, right? Global warming. We'll talk about that in a minute, right? As temperatures rise, the sky's able to go farther north. Things like bugs, little things are able to get farther up north, and spring starts earlier for a lot of things. All right, what's the difference between epidemic and a pandemic? Okay, a situation in which a pathogen causes a rapid increase in disease. Pandemic over a large geographic region. So this is kind of the area, large area of infection. This is rapid increase in it, right? A plague is an infectious disease caused by bacterium. Yersinia pestis, so from the rats, fleas on the rats. And these have a really high mobility, especially they can get on boats and hide out. So they're able to infect things really, really quickly. Okay, malaria. Make sure you know what the causes of these things are, okay? You need to make sure you know, because they'll ask you questions that say, like, what is the potential risk of the situation? Like, what disease would probably be a risk, would be a higher risk because of the situation set up, right? All right, malaria, different protists, the genus Plasmodium, right? And right now we get a lot of this through mosquitoes. You saw that in the videos, right? So I want you to think about ways to prevent mosquitoes, get rid of these guys, right? All right, tuberculosis, highly contagious disease caused by bacterium, mycobacterium. Myco is fungus. And tuberculosis, that affects your respiratory system, right? All right, so let's look tuberculosis cases because we have effective medicines. So look here, tuberculosis goes way down. Tuberculosis deaths go down as well. So this is the United States. So look here, when you got money, you got access to good health care, you got access to effective medications, and there is a public health awareness that exists, right? But worldwide, look what's going on. We have an increase, a little bit of a decrease here, but definitely higher, right? So again, it's linked to money. Diseases can be controlled if you got money and research going on, good infrastructure. Okay, so let's look here. Emergent of new diseases. Let's look at the hantavirus, dengue fever we're getting here. And why is that? Because these mosquitoes are able to go up further north. It's getting warmer, more humid. H1N1 bird flu. Keep in mind, these are transmissible between bird and human. The pig flu, however, where's it at? I don't see pig flu on here, but pig flu is not transmissible from pig directly to human. Yeah, that's not how it works. Okay. So HIV here. It's pretty interesting, right? Okay, Ebola. And we'll talk about Ebola in a little bit. Just keep in mind, though, Ebola has killed quite a few people in Africa, but very, very few people in the America. One, because not a lot of Americans have gotten it. But the people who did get it, we didn't really cure it, but we were able to take care of them, palliative care, like while they were sick with it. So all they had to do was kind of survive the virus, and they had to have the correct nutrients and vitamins and things like that, right? So just keep in mind that's the difference between like availability of clean water, availability of good health care, of sterile facilities and things like that, and you can do a lot of good things. Okay, so let's talk about AIDS a little bit. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's an infectious disease caused by the human. So this is a sexually transmitted or blood on blood. Different types of body fluids can do that. Okay, immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Human immunodeficiency virus is a type of virus caused by an acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So this is you lose a lot of your antibodies, and then you eventually become susceptible to something that's like a respiratory illness, and you can die from it, right? Okay, Ebola, hemorrhage fever, an infectious disease with high death rates caused by the Ebola virus. Let's move right along. Okay, mad cow disease or BSE. Bovine spongiform encephalitis. I believe that's what it is, something like that. Okay, prions, which are really, really small and really hard to treat. In fact, we don't really know exactly how to do them yet. So these will mutate in deadly pathogens, slowly damage the cow's nervous system, the brain, right? So they act like really weird. Swine flu caused by the H1N1 virus, make sure you know these. And bird flu is a type of flu caused by the H5N1 virus. Severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS, type of flu caused by coronavirus. West Nile virus, a virus that lives in hundreds of species of birds and is transmitted among bird and mosquitoes. Okay, human health factors face a number of future challenges. So again, low-income countries need improvements in nutrition, clean drinking water, and sanitation. High-income countries need to promote healthier lifestyle choices, like physical activity, better diets, and not eating so much, right? Obviously, tobacco and alcohol, really big. And just reducing the number of car accidents, vehicle collisions, right? So just not texting while driving. So little laws like not texting while driving, otherwise you get like a penalty, will help bring down deaths, right? So just having little incentives that reduce risky behavior will also help. Our educateds need everywhere to reduce the spread of diseases such as HIV and tuberculosis, and with HIV especially, comprehensive sex education is very important because in places where you have it, you have a lot less HIV. It's just a fact, right? It's just a fact. Obviously, they always say in places that are in the South, like the Bible Belt, like abstinence-only education, or abstinence is the best way to prevent the disease, and that's true for an individual. When you're talking about public health in large numbers, it makes more common sense to make sure you cover all your bases, right, and have the comprehensive education. Okay. Let's identify the major types of harmful chemicals. So we're going to look at different things that affect the human body and in public health, and also the ecosystem. Explain how scientists determine concentrations of chemicals that harm organisms. This is going to be your ED50 and LD50. If I'm going fast, slow it down, back it up, turn the captions on, pause it anytime you want. Okay, so look at this graph, look at this chart. You're going to want to know this. So you should already be very familiar with lead, mercury, arsenic, asbestos, radon, atrazine, DDT, phthalates, right? We learned about phthalates in Bagot, right? So make sure you know about phthalates. Okay, endocrine disruptor, feminization of males. If you really, really, really weren't even interested in environmental science, or like, hey, you know what, I don't know about this global warming, if everything did this to you, there would be a whole lot of regulation. That's all I got to say. So just look through here, all the things that mess with your endocrine, that mess with your hormones, right? And if these matter to you, why don't things like these matter to you, right? They both have harmful effects on human populations, right? So make sure you go through these. Make sure you remember asbestos, the silent killer, radon, the other silent killer. This one was from the ground down. This one was all around you in the ceiling tiles, right? Remember, Toby is the silent killers, right? So bisphenols, atrazine. So make sure you know these things, right? This softens the bald eagle eggs through bioaccumulation, biomagnification. All right, neurotoxins, the chemical that disrupts the nervous system of animals. Carcinogen causes cancer. Mutagen causes damage to genetic material of the cell. It can make it mutate into something like cancer. Right. Teratogen is a chemical that interferes with normal development of embryos and fetuses. And there was the thalidomide. It was the example I gave you in your textbook. You can see the very tragic pictures of the individuals that had thalidomide in their systems when they were embryos, right? So allergens, a chemical that causes allergic reactions. Some of y'all have allergies, especially like pollen. I'm really allergic to mountain cedar. That stuff makes me break out in hives. It's really gross. Okay, and endocrine disruptors are chemicals that interfere with the normal functioning of hormones in the animal's body. And the one that we really learned about earlier in different pesticides, I think atrazine ended up being in some of our pesticides, and this feminizes the tadpoles and frogs and makes them hermaphroditic. They got male and female parts. All right, scientists can determine the concentrations of chemicals that harm organisms. And so they do studies, right? They'll do studies. They'll do dose-response studies. So this is like our LD50, where half the population dies, so it's a lethal dose, 50%. They'll also do ED50, effective dose, where they can start seeing things work and affect things, but not necessarily be fatal. You got prospective studies, where pro is before. So they're going to maybe do a study that looks at the doses or some sort of environmental factor and sees how many things are affected by it. And retrospective is when they look back and they ask people, oh, were you ever, did you eat paint chips as a child? Right, and so they'll do a little survey on kids that ate paint chips as a child, and they'll look at different data on them, or they'll run studies on them like that. So that's the difference between prospective and retrospective and dose studies. Let's run through these real quick. Okay, organisms to different amounts of chemicals and observes the responses, right? Behavior, reproduction. Remember that, and I know it's kind of a throwback word, but you need to know it. Reproduction is the level of fitness that an individual has. So make sure you link reproduction to fitness, right? You could have no arms and no legs, no ability to do any lift. Do you even lift, bro? No, you can't, right? But you could still reproduce, so your fitness is not affected. So there's a different word, fitness. Okay, acute study exposes organisms for a short duration. Chronic study exposes organisms for a long, long duration. LD50 kills 50% of the individuals in a dose-response study. So dose response is related to LD50. Okay, so here we go. So you want to read these graphs, be able to read these graphs. So right at where the population, half the population dies at 50, that would be your LD50. Right here, this is like your threshold. This is where things start to happen. Right? So like if you're looking for like effective dose, something like that, you're looking for something like right here. Okay, sublethal effects. Environmental hazard is not lethal, but may impair an organism's behavior, physiology, or reproduction. So these are the things we look at when we're looking at, okay, now ED50 is the dose of chemical that causes 50% of the individuals in a dose-response study to display harmful but non-lethal effects. Okay, so nothing's happened to them yet, but if it does accumulate and then magnify up the trophic pyramid, then it'll have some effects. So there's just something to keep in mind here. If they're not all dying, it doesn't mean that it's going to be okay in the long run. That stuff will magnify as it moves up and accumulates into different biological matter. All right, so retrospective studies monitor people who have been exposed to environmental hazards at some point in the past. Prospective, people might become exposed to harmful chemicals in the future. So they'll do studies on the effects of them currently, right? So they'll track them. They'll track them progressively, right? So they'll follow them around and just kind of see what happens to them over time. Okay. Synergistic interactions, the situation in which two risks together cause more harm than the expected base separate effects alone would do. So this is kind of talking about that one documentary we watched, I think it was the TAP documentary, where the stuff in the water, the companies are like, oh yeah, this chemical's totally fine, but they didn't test it in concert with other chemicals, right? So because they didn't test it in all the different permutations and combinations that it can combine with other molecules and compounds in the wild, you have no idea what the effect of that actually is going to be until maybe years, maybe even decades later, right? So that's one of the challenges with public health is this idea of synergistic interactions. All right, factors that determine concentrations of chemicals that organisms experience. You're looking at the route to exposure, the way in which an individual might come into contact with an environmental hazard. All right, so here's the routes to exposure. So it's very similar to the way that there are routes to transmission of diseases. Routes to exposure have to do with chemicals, though. So you've got air, so here's like a good idea for like your air. Obviously, if you live in a third world country, it's not just air from factories necessarily, but it could be indoor air pollution from burning biofuel, like dung, coal, charcoal, things like that, right? Your food, that's why we have like the FDA. All right, soil. So we've talked about phytoremediation as well. So if you have like chemicals in the ground, this stuff can get into your food, which you eat, and then get you sick, right? All right, water, like fecal coliform bacteria, and then fetus babies. So anything that the mother might have can be transferred to the fetus. All right, solubility of chemicals, bioaccumulation, and biomagnifications. So just think about solubility. If solubility goes up, right? That means it's going to be able to dissolve easier into a solution, which means it's going to increase the amount that you'll get if you drink water or you consume something that was in that solution. All right, so percolation means able to get through. It's able to permeate into the groundwater, run off into surfaces like rivers and lakes. So just think, if something's very soluble, it's going to be able to mix into solution with that, and it'll get into our water and then eventually get into things that are fat soluble, are not very soluble in water, and are found in higher concentrations. So either way, whether you're dealing with the polar or nonpolar molecule, they can kind of concentrate in different ways, right? All right, so what's the difference between bioaccumulation and biomagnification? Bioaccumulation is an increased concentration of chemical with an organism over time, right? So this is literally just acquiring more of that stuff. But biomagnification is the increased chemical concentration as the chemical moves up the food chain, right? So this is the thing where you're getting 10% more increase per every level, and this right here is literally just you're eating more and getting more of it in your body. Okay, persistence, you need to know this word, is the length of time that a chemical remains in the environment, and it's very helpful for us to look at this almost the same way that we did with half times, right? All right, so looking at the time it takes for something to reduce its concentration by half, and there's a chart for this right here. And we'll look at that in just a second. All right, so here's a biomagnification, bioaccumulation. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just read this. The initial exposure is primarily in a low trophic group, such as the plankton in a lake. Consumption causes the upward movement of the chemical, where it is accumulated in the bodies at each trophic level. So they'll accumulate here, which will accumulate here. But what's happening here? The combination of bioaccumulation at each trophic level and upward movement by consumption allows the concentration to magnify, or it can be substantially more concentrated in the top predator as it was in the water. Because think about it like this, right? When we learned about trophic pyramids and the amount of land that something like a tertiary top predator is going to need, it needs a lot more land. It needs a whole lot more land than everything else because it has to take the energy from all the levels below it. And since you lose so much of the energy from each trophic level, like 90%, or sometimes less, sometimes more, but around that level, it needs to consume a lot more. It needs to be able to take up a lot more land so it can get all those resources, right? So it just goes to show that if you were to take in the toxins at each level, that it's going to concentrate higher and higher and higher as it goes up, right? So just think about it like that. If you need more land because you lose so much energy, you're going to accumulate a lot more of those chemicals as it goes up. All right, and that's 17A.